Thank you. Last session, last presentation. So this is a joint work with Loretta Fang from Taiwan and my colleague at Statistique and Duri. So the immigrant-trade link has been a long and important research question. The first two presenters has been summarized the literature very well. Basically, there's a lot of study had to look at the issue within Canada, the US, and other countries. So this issue is particularly important for Canada, relevant for Canada, because Canada has a relatively large share of the immigrant population. According to OECD, in 2013, 20% immigrants accounting for 20% of the population in Canada, and it's highest among G7 countries. And also, Canada is a small open economy, and this export heavily rely on the US. So there's a need to diversify and expand export globally, import-export globally. So one of the main mechanisms argued in the literature with which the immigrant has impact on the trade is information effect. So the immigrant has knowledge of their home country. They know their language, they know their culture, and they know the business network. So that's going to be reducing the trade costs. And most literature has been using the immigrant information at national or provincial or regional level. And one of the common findings in the literature that immigrant does have a positive impact on the trade, and often the case is that the effect is larger for import compared to export. However, what's remaining, so basically what literature finds is that if you're increasing the immigrant stock by X% at national or provincial or regional level, and then you got increasing Y% in terms of the value of import or export. So, however, what's remain largely unknown is how the immigrant actively participate in the international trade, and how that participation compared to Canadian-owned and Canadian-born. So this paper is going to look at a particular angle of that participation, immigrant participation in the trade, that is immigrant-owned firm. So how immigrant-owned firm participate in the international trade as compared to Canadian-owned firm. So we can look at this impact on both intensive margin and intensive margin, which means extensive margin including the probability of the firm import-export and also the number of the product import-export. The intensive margin will be the average value per product. We're also going to look at, for different product group, whether the impact is similar or different across is for non-differentiated good and for differentiated good. Also, most of the existing literatures only look at the manufacturing sector. We're going to compare the effect cross-industry, mainly compare manufacturing and the wholesale trade sector. One of the reasons is that there's a recent study in the literature suggests that the importance of the immigrant as trade intermediary for the trade, especially with more distant market. Okay. So the data we're using come from the CEED, Canadian Employer-Employee Database, has been described a few times during this 2 days presentation. It's a linked environment, involving lots of administrative data. That's including individual text file T1, T4, business file T2, and the T1 BD, which is unincorporated business. The immigrant file comes from IMDb, and also the record employment, which come from the ESDC. So within the file, we can identify the firm level ownership for all the private corporation and unincorporated business in Canada. We know who owned the firm, what share owned the firm. The immigrant information is coming from the IMDb, so it has It's identified all the immigrants landing in Canada after the 1980s, so including information on age, gender, education, language, where they come from, the immigration category. Right? So if you're linking, so we know who are the owner and we know which one the immigrant, so we can identify which firm are owned by immigrant. For this paper, we also link to both import-export data. For the import data, we're using raw trade data for analytical purpose back to 2002 to 2012. For exports, however, we only have 2 years, 11 and 12. But both the trade data are at firm level by different product, HS6, and by different country, destination or source country. So we do have some sample selection. So first of all, we'll focus on only the incorporated firm. The reason is because the incorporated firm is accounting for the vast majority of the trade activity, right? So in 2002, we see that 84% of the all linked importer and 98% all valid importer are accounted for by the incorporated firm, and even larger for export. We also only focus on the simple enterprise. By that we mean within the same enterprise, you only have one business number. Business number is a unique business identifier assigned by CRA. So the reason is that one is because almost all private corporations in Canada in 2012 are simple. Right? It's only one BN number within the same enterprise, and also because of the business ownership information is only available at business number level, while the information on the trade is available at enterprise level, so much higher level. So to bridge these two, so we just restrict on the simple enterprise. So in the end, the final sample within the scope of all merchandise trading in Canada. So how big is the final sample? It's accounting for roughly 60% of the import-exporter, but in terms of value, it's much smaller. It's only 15 for import and 12% for export. So it's really, really small firm, really small player for international trade, but it's more policy relevant because they're more on the margin, right? So it's more likely to be affected by any policy question. So that's our the population. So how we define the immigrant business ownership? We have two ways. One is based on whether the immigrant own the largest share of the firm. The second is based on the presence of the immigrant owner, whether have at least one immigrant owner within the firm. And in the end, we didn't find much difference too. So for the analysis, for subsequent analysis, we're just taking the second approach. A business is defined as business owned at least if there's at least one immigrant owner within the firm. In case of the multiple owner, we pick the principal owner based on the ownership share, the highest share, and then the income. So to simplify the analysis, because we have firm level trade and then we have each firm, we have detailed country. To simplify the analysis, we basically aggregate up all the trade data and immigrant source data into 9 regions. And then following the Ross classification, we group the different product into 3 different groups: organized exchange, reference price, and differentiated. So in the literature, it's argued that information is more important for the trade of a differentiated good. So you would expect immigrant has a larger impact for trade of a differentiated good. And to simplify, we combine the organized exchange and reference price product into non-differential and then differential. So we have 2 type two type product. So this is to show you a few slides about data. So this is the share of immigrant-owned business by sector, average over 2001 to 2012. As you can see, a couple of things. it's worth to point out that first one is that, among the transportation and then the arts, entertainment, recreation, accommodation, food service, there's a larger share of the immigrant-owned business. However, among the agriculture and mining, you see a much smaller share. And if you look at this is the share of the business, and this is the share of the employment that comes by the immigrant business. And then the share of employment is much smaller than the share of the firm, which means on average, the immigrant-owned firms are smaller. This is the distribution of the value of the import-export cross sector. So the highlight two industries is manufacturing and wholesale. That's almost accounting for 80% all trade within the sample. Right? And especially the immigrant among the wholesale trade sector is more important for the immigrant. So within the immigrant-owned firm, 60% of the all value is contributed by the wholesale sector, and only 50% for Canadian-owned. Right? And for export, almost 40% the all export within the immigrant-owned firm are coming from the wholesale sector, as compared to only 18% for Canadian-owned firm. This is, we look at the distributed import-export across different traded regions. A single most largest partner is North American, basically it's US, right? So if you look at all firm import is over half of the import come from the US, and more than 70% export to US. It's especially for Canadian-owned firm. So the shares are much even larger for Canadian-owned firm. Another thing is to look at this. However, the share going to export to US and import from US is much smaller, right, compared to Canadian-owned firm. And they're more diversified across different regions. So largest imports come from East Asia. The second largest is also export region is also going to East South Asia. This is try to look at the different characteristics between the import-export between the immigrant-owned and Canadian-owned, how different they're in terms of firm characteristic. So within the wholesale trade sector, I look at the importer, and then for the manufacturer, I look at exporter, just to make the slides short. And you can see the immigrant owner tend to be younger, the principal owner, right? 47 years compared to 53. And then although it's still dominated by the male, but the share of the male is relatively smaller for immigrant-owned firm. And they're much smaller firm size compared to Canadian-owned. Their productivity is also lower. And then their high leverage ratio, which is total liability divided by total asset. And their numbered product import-export, and then also total value is also smaller. So the next, we're going to do the econometric analysis. So basically, we break down the problem into two. So one is the probability of the firm import-export. For this, we run a linear probability model where, so for each firm, for each year, and for each region, we look at whether the firm import-export. And based on whether the firm are owned by immigrant last period. So using the lag, it basically try to control the reverse causality. The origin variable is another variable, which is whether the traded region are same as the business owners region. And beside that, we also control for the owner's characteristic, age, gender. We control for the firm characteristic, employment size, labor productivity, leverage ratio, and we also control for local labor market, which including the population, immigrant share within the same area where the firm resided, the median income, and immigrant population. So we control for the local demand effect. Also, we including a bunch of fixed facts, try to control for the GDP for source country, and then the change of the exchange rate over time between Canada and the other country. And then we condition on your import-export. We look at the number of product you actually import-export, and also the average value you import-export. So basically, we run almost same equation. We just change the y, the dependent variable to the number of product and the average value. So this is the impact of immigrant based on import. So we look at for manufacturing sector, wholesale trade sector, and then we look at 3 different margin. So if this one is, if we don't controlling for the orange, where the trade going to, just look at whether the firm owned by immigrant or not, it's actually negative, right, in terms of probability import. So which that means that on average, regardless of the import come from, the immigrant-owned business doesn't increase in the probability to import compared to Canadian-owned business. However, if you control for where the import comes from, if the imports come from the owner's own region, it's a very strong, big positive impact. And then the combined, basically the sum of these two, which give you the marginal effect of the immigrant business on the import from this own region, which is significant and positive. Right? And you can see that also for the number of product is negative, regardless where the product come from. But once you control for the origin, and then it's turned to be the positive, and also for average value. Another thing to look at is also the impact tend to be larger for wholesale sector compared to the manufacturing sector. Then we look at the different product, non-differentiate and differentiate. Basically, what we find is that if you look at combined effects, so the impacts are much larger for the import of differentiated goods from its own region, right, as compared to Canadian-owned firm. And this is also true for another different margin, product margin, and also the intensity margin. It's also true for wholesale sector as well. Export is same thing. You see, if you don't control where you export to, it's negative. But once you control for where you export, it turns to be positive. And also, the impact is also larger in the wholesale sector compared to manufacturing. Same thing, same message for export by different product group. It's larger impact for export of differentiated good. But there's a couple of issues. One is I mentioned that is reverse causality. So if there's a country has good trade relationship with Canada, so it's also encouraged the immigrant coming to Canada and open a business and doing the trade with their own home country, right? Although we try to control, we're using lag, try to control for that. But just to do the sensitive analysis, we first exercise, we drop all the business owned by East Asian immigrant, which including Chinese immigrant. So the concerns basically for the China joined the WTO in 2000, and then if there's a big flow of the immigrant coming from China, and then the opening business doing the trade with China. The second problem is that, as I showed you before, the export to U.S. and also import from U.S. has a very larger share, right? So if there's immigrant coming from the U.S., so the own region will be mostly driven by the U.S. import-export. So in second exercise, we drop all the import-export from U.S. and to U.S., and also we dropped all the firm, including owned by U.S. immigrant. And the result, it doesn't seem some different, but it's not that big. Right? It's pretty much similar as the or benchmark result. Similar we did for export as well. The result also, it doesn't change much. It's slightly smaller after we excluding U.S. because there's a big chunk of the export going to U.S. So we also think of another issue that there's potentially, there's endogeneity of the immigrant business owner, right? So if there's demand shock that will correlate with the business immigrant open business at the same time correlate with trade, then basically we're going to pick up the effect. If anyone has some suggestion for the instrument variable, so please let us know. The other one is the interaction between immigrant owner and employee. As the first presenter has shown that immigrant employee has positive impact on the trade, but there's interaction between the immigrant business ownership and the immigrant business employee. So immigrant owner firm tend to be more likely to hire immigrant employee. So now we didn't control for immigrant employee. So potentially the impact on immigrant business ownership might pick up some effect from immigrant employee. So that's another thing we have to think about. So based on what we have now, so I conclude the paper. So we look at the participation of immigrant-owned firm, immigrant-owned small business in the international trade. So the participation is really bilateral, right? So really between Canada and the immigrant owners' region of origin. With their own region of origin, we see they're more likely to import-export. The import-export more product, and then the average value import-export is also larger. We see the result is significant on both extensive and intensive margin, which suggest that the immigrant does help to reduce both fixed costs and also the variable cost of trade. We also see that the impact is larger for wholesale sector compared to manufacturing sector. So this is also, emphasize the role of the immigrant-owned business as a trade intermediary in international trade. The last we saw the impact is also larger for differential good than the non-differential good. So this is highlight the role of the immigrant-owned firm is as reducing especially the cost for the trade of the differential good. Yeah, thank you. That's it.